Hello everyone. I am open to Module 3, which you'll be working on this coming week, and we'll be covering chapters 5 and 6. So chapter 5 deals with attitudes, and chapter 6 is stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. So there's a lot of material here this week. Chapters 5 and 6 really piggyback off of one another. So I recommend reading them in conjunction, and even as you're reading through chapter 5 and it's looking at attitudes, when you then go to chapter 6, keep in mind a lot of those concepts that help explain how we form our attitudes, opinions, judgments when we then start talking about stereotyping and prejudice and discrimination, because a lot of what's going to build up in chapter 5 helps to explain then these outcomes that chapter 6 covers. So here is the to-do list for this week. You're going to be first covering the chapter objectives. So like I've said in previous podcasts, it's really important to use these to help you in knowing what you need to cover and what you are responsible for understanding in each chapter. So in chapter 5, you're going to be really getting down into the core of attitude formation, what goes into our cognitions as we're deciding on what we believe or what we think, things that influence us. So it's going to kind of draw in concepts that we've already covered in the social perception chapter and the social cognition chapter. It's even going to tie in elements that you likely remember from intro psych. So we'll be talking about learning principles. We often develop attitudes and we don't even know where those attitudes came from or how they formed in the first place, being that they often develop outside our conscious awareness. Via operant conditioning or classical conditioning. We model after other people's behavior and we pick up on what others are doing. So observational learning is a key part of that as well. And we use that and we compare ourselves to others. Okay, so we're always sort of using other people, i.e. social comparison, as a benchmark for where we are. How do our attitudes fall in line with other people's attitudes? Are we different? Are we the same? That can affect how we acquire a particular attitude, and as well as how we retain certain beliefs. And then we'll start to get into the functions that attitude serves. Why do we have certain attitudes towards people or things or groups? Where does that come from? As we lay the foundation for attitudes, we'll then start to draw a bridge between our attitudes and then the resulting behavior. How do our attitudes influence our behavior? And how does our behavior influence our attitude? Because it really is a two-way street. Sometimes we think something or we feel something and it influences how we act, but sometimes we act and then, we act first and then we think, oh, wait a minute, I just acted in a way that's inconsistent with a belief I hold or an attitude I hold. And so then it's either we're going to try to draw that attitude in line with the behavior, or we're just going to continue the behavior despite the fact that it doesn't really fall in line with what we feel. So we'll get into some of the theories about why that happens. We'll take a look at the theory of reasoned action, and we'll take a look at that attitude behavior link a little bit more. We'll also be getting into a little bit of persuasion in this chapter. How are we persuaded, right? So when we're forming an attitude, we may be persuaded one way or another, and people are keen on this. This is where marketing and business really, get a lot of their core fuel for strategies that they use. Is if we can be persuaded, and I'm trying to sell something, I really want to know how that persuasion works so that I can be effective at selling my product or my brand, or my idea or my belief, or getting you to vote a certain way. So historically, we'll look at key factors in social psychology that affect persuasion. We'll take a look at some specific tactics there, and we'll look at the cognitive processes behind it. So behind every bit of persuasion, you have routes that individuals take that are more central, and some that are more peripheral or work out of conscious awareness. So sometimes we're very aware of how we're being influenced or persuaded, and sometimes we have no clue. So we'll take a look at how that affects us as well. As we round out that chapter, we'll take a look at cognitive dissonance, which is another key concept in social psych, and this is the idea that our behaviors don't always match our beliefs. Okay, a smoker typically knows that smoking is really bad for them. They agree that they shouldn't do it, it's not good, yet they do it anyways. And some people would think, well, that's hypocritical, but really it's just cognitive dissonance. The individual comes to believe that smoking's not so bad because they're doing it. And they have to sort of allay some of that anxiety that occurs when they know their behavior is inconsistent with their attitudes. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and looking at the Festinger and Carl Smith study that sort of spawned cognitive dissonance and that theory and that idea. So that rounds off chapter 5. And again, a lot of that's going to lay the foundation for then getting into some really heavy concepts in chapter 6, where we deal with prejudice, racism, and discrimination. We'll be taking a look at all the cognitive operations behind prejudice. Where does it come from? Where does it stem? How do schemas work in and out of our favor? How does our emotional state provide often the basis or the foundation for the stereotypes that we have about other people? How does this affect us in our relationships with others? So we'll look at this in an applied setting, in terms of, in the workplace. We'll look at various types of discrimination, all the isms, and heterosexism, racism, all the different various forms that prejudice can take on. We'll look at some concepts that help to explain why people have the need to group themselves. And that's really what causes the division, is when we identify with certain groups. We then see ourselves like others and unlike others. And it's who we identify with that is behind sort of the curtain of where a lot of our prejudice can come from. But the biggest offense in prejudice is the utilization of stereotypes. So we're going to spend a lot of time on the function of stereotypes. Why do we have them? Why do they exist? Are they true? And if not, why do they continue to exist? We're going to be taking a look at a lot of different videos. So you're going to see this week that I have several different videos that I'm going to have you watching, including a full-length film, and all of that is wrapped into your discussion questions for the week. So as you're going through a lot of these concepts here, good to take notes, and also good to have that handy as you're watching the videos so that you can kind of look at how the concepts are related to what you're seeing in the videos. Especially the movie that we're going to be watching this week. You're going to want to take a look at the various characters in the movie and how you're seeing these concepts played out in that film. So we're going to look at why prejudice persists, why it continues, how it has or hasn't gotten better over time, how has it changed, and then rounding off the chapter with how do we fix it, or can we fix it? So kind of what does research show in terms of ways to reduce prejudice and its role in our relationships with others. The article readings for this week are Articles 16 and 17. Here are your lecture slides for Chapter 5 and 6. And here's where we start the videos. We're going to be taking a look at a really seminal video done in the 60s by third grade teacher Jane Elliott. She looks at prejudice and racism in her third grade class during a time that was very racially charged. This was right after the assassination of Martin Luther King. And she really just wanted to know, like, how does prejudice and racism form? And can it form early on in life? And if so, what does that look like? So this is a super interesting video. You're going to get a lot from it, and I give some questions here to be thinking about as you watching over the video. Be thinking about these concepts here and how they're being played out in her experiment that she does. I have another video. It's just a quick clip. Actually, it's a commercial talking about different elements of prejudice, particularly with homophobic attitudes, and just some of the stereotypes that exist and how they can fuel a prejudice when it comes to homophobia. And then we have this video here is looking at how to measure prejudice, particularly prejudice that we don't even realize we have. It's called implicit prejudice. So the test that's designed to measure that is the IAT, which is short for Implicit Association Test. This is a Dateline special that looks at the researchers who developed the test and how they use it. Super interesting. You can even go online and take versions of the IAT if you're interested in doing that. But they'll talk about how to measure this sort of prejudice and how does it influence our behavior, i.e. discrimination, because prejudice is the attitude and discrimination is the behavior of that. Here is the feature movie that we're going to be covering. It's Crash. Some of you may have seen this. It came out in, I think, early 2000. Lots of famous people in this movie. Really great movie. Won some Academy Awards. And I give you some questions to think about. It is jam-packed with examples of everything from implicit and explicit racism, prejudice, discrimination. The struggles of the individuals in this movie are very real. It's based on people in LA, which is a largely diverse city with many race relation problems. And so you're going to see a lot of grouping of individuals in the kind of us versus them dichotomy. So I want you looking for examples. If it helps, you might want to write down the characters' names and just examples as you go through the movie of kind of what are they struggling with and how does that map onto concepts that you read about in the textbook. So definitely you want to make sure that you've done the readings before you watch this movie. Because it will not help you at all to do it in the reverse order. You want to have a good understanding of concepts behind prejudice and discrimination before you dive into watching this film. And so all of that is going to form the basis for your discussion for this week. Again, you're using Articles 16 and 17. And I really want you integrating what you're reading as well as the videos. You also want to be citing correctly. I commented back in several of your discussion posts from last week that people are not citing in APA format, and that is a must. So I've given you instructions on how to do that. You'd be wise to take a look at that. It's in the Cite as you write. It's one document, and it really just outlines how to cite in APA format. For those of you who are not familiar already with it. But you're going to be using those videos as a fuel for responding to these discussion questions. A little bit of it is your opinion, how optimistic or pessimistic are you that prejudice can be eliminated? And a little bit is, okay, now what does research say? Are there any real strategies we could be using here? Okay, and then you're going to be taking exam 3, which covers chapters 5 and 6, and that will do it for this week. Please let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a great week, everyone.